Vanakkam. Welcome to this video on biomechanics. In the previous video, we introduced the notion of finger enslavement, and we said that there are three hypothesized reasons for finger enslavement, namely tendinous force transmission or intertendinous force transmission, or multi-digit motor units, or diverging central commands. These are the three reasons that we hypothesized for this. In this video, we will begin our discussion on a research article by Zachowski, Zhongming Li and Latache on enslaving effects in multi-finger force production. It is a landmark paper discussing and contributing in a big way for our understanding of finger force enslavement. Okay. In this video, I will just try to introduce or at least set up the methods. Then in future videos, we will discuss the results and possibly the implications. Okay. Before we begin our discussion of the 2000 paper, there is a prequel or a prerequisite. There was a paper in 1998 by Zachowski and colleagues in which they measured and studied finger enslavement. The task was in a multi-finger force production, fingertip force production task. They measured the fingertip forces and tried to correlate or relate, come up with a relationship between these fingertip forces. And specifically, they were asking questions about how well correlated are finger forces, are finger forces enslaved, or one finger enslaved with respect to another finger, or what is the magnitude of this enslavement and other such questions. They wanted to make some general observations about the finger enslavement. What they found from that study was that enslavement effects, shortly called EE, going forward in the rest of the discussion, I will call this EE. EE means enslavement effects or enslaving effects. What they found was that EE was large. In general, enslavement effect is not trivial or something that is small. And enslavement effect is nearly symmetrical, that the enslavement produced by one finger, finger X on finger Y, and the enslavement produced by Y and X, nearly the same, not exactly the same, nearly symmetrical. Another finding was that enslavement effect is higher if a slave finger is a neighbor of a master finger. So, that enslavement effect is larger for fingers that are neighbors of each other. That is, if index finger is the master finger, then the enslavement effect on the middle finger is greater than the enslavement effect on the little finger, because little finger is far away from index finger, but middle finger is right next to index finger. Because of this reason, enslaving effect is large for middle finger when compared with little finger if the instructed finger is the index finger. Okay. The other was that enslaving effects are not additive. You cannot merely add enslaving effects to find a net enslaving effect depending on the fingers. Okay. That is something that you cannot avoid. One more interesting observation that they had was, if you had more than two fingers involved, explicitly involved, if you had two or three explicitly involved fingers, then the enslavement effect on the uninvolved fingers was smaller than the enslavement effect when only one of those explicitly involved fingers was working. What I am saying, let us try to unpack that. That is, let us say I am interested in measuring the enslavement effect of the little finger, enslavement effect on the little finger when index finger is working. I will just write master, slave. This does not necessarily imply a hierarchy. it's terminology. Okay, doesn't necessarily mean that there is slave of this. It's some names that we are giving. Okay, okay, they are actually collaborators in the large scheme of things. It's not like one is a master, the other is a slave, and the one person he listens to the other. There is no implication of hierarchy. Okay, this is a terminology that I am using. Let us say index finger is the master and I am measuring little finger. Index and middle is the master and I am measuring little finger. Index plus middle plus ring and I am measuring little finger. Okay. In all these cases, I am measuring the effect of force produced by these set of master fingers on the little finger. Okay. I can also, for completeness, study middle finger and little finger, ring finger and little finger. For completeness, I can also study middle plus ring and little finger, and index plus ring and little finger. I can also study these. Okay. Let us assume this is what I am doing. Question. The question is, if I had a way to compare the amount of enslavement where the explicitly involved fingers was just one, either I or M or R, or just two, IM, MR or IR, or 3. So, there are 3 categories in which I can have, one finger, what are the type of tasks. The type of tasks are one finger tasks are 3, 2 finger tasks are 3, 3 finger tasks are 1. Is that correct? 1, 2, 3. That is correct. My question is, can I compare the amount of enslavement in these 3 tasks with these 3 tasks and this one task? How would enslavement in the little finger vary? It turns out that enslavement in 3 finger tasks is less than the enslavement in the 2 finger tasks, and which is less than the 1 finger tasks. When many fingers are explicitly involved in the task, the enslavement effect reduces. As the number of explicitly involved fingers increases, the enslavement effect reduces. This is called as occlusion effect. This is called as occlusion effect. There is an occlusion. They also modeled this using a neural network model that showed that activation of the flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor digitorum superficialis muscles resulted in force production by many of these digits or all of these digits. Okay. This is what they found in the 1998 paper. Now, in this paper, which is the Zatsowski 2000 paper, by the way, this is the 1998 paper that we are discussing. This is the background for the current work. This is our original paper of interest. This is the 2000 paper in experimental brain research, available freely on the internet. Please do read the original paper for greater understanding, and please do write to me in case you are not able to understand or you want some clarification. I am very happy to respond to you in the course forum. Okay. When flexor digitorum profundus, flexor digitorum superficialis and the intrinsic muscles are differentially activated, the question is how would you do that? We will come to that in a bit. Okay. suppose I can differentially activate these muscles, what would be the relative contribution of peripheral and central factors to enslavement effect in multi-finger force production tasks? That is the question. The question is, how can you differentially activate the muscles? Because it turns out that the distal phalanges, the proximal phalanges and the middle phalanges are innervated by different muscles. Because of this reason, if I use different segments, either the proximal phalange or the distal phalange or the middle phalange, to produce the force, then I would be activating only the muscles that are innervating that phalanx, that are supplying, that are supporting that phalanx, is it not? Using this, they designed, Zachorsky and colleagues, they designed a novel experimental approach, a tool to study this. Remember, this kind of experimentation requires a relatively deep understanding of the anatomy and physiology. You need to know that these muscles supply differentially to the fingers. You cannot just measure the fingertip forces. You need to go a little deeper, which is why this field is a multidisciplinary field, an interdisciplinary field in which you combine your understanding of anatomy and physiology to arrive at these kind of structure function relationships, especially in these kinds where you try to understand the neural contribution by measuring mechanics. These kind of studies require a relatively deep understanding of the anatomy and physiology. You need to know which muscles are innervating where. Without that, you could not have designed this experiment. So, something to keep in mind, which is why I urge all of you to go a little deeper in anatomy and physiology, and that is what I have attempted in my classes previously, that I have given a relatively deep understanding of the structure function relationships throughout, so that you will be in a position to take this forward and build upon that. That is what these authors have done. They actually built this experimental setup in which force sensors, these are piezoelectric force sensors, 4 of these, they are present here. See. It simply says piezoelectric, it simply says force sensors. Here I am saying piezoelectric force sensors, the type of force sensors. What these do is they measure, they are capable of measuring compressive or tensile forces on them. One directional force transducers are there, also commonly called as 1D load cells. These are okay. These are load cells that measure either compressive force or tensile force. In this case, they are interested in measuring the tensile force. What they did was they suspended these force sensors from slots. You know, there are these 4 slots. Are you able to see these 4 slots? Okay. And from the other end of the force sensor, they connected a rope or a thread. I think this was made of steel or metal, we will have to check that, the details. I think these were steel ropes that went on to form a loop kind of thing. This loop, I will draw this. With some padding where you can keep the fingers, spongy padding, soft padding where you can keep your fingers. Okay. I guess. Now, if I place my fingers, let us say the fingertips are the distal phalanges, inside these loops, and press hard on these loops such that I am going to pull down this rope, the force that I am using to to pull these ropes down will be measured by the force transducers. I can put multiple, I can place all my 4 fingers, all the 4 fingers in these 4 loops. There are loops available for all these 4 fingers and force transducers available to study the measure the forces of all these 4 fingers. Okay. An arrangement was also made such that the wrist position was secured. The wrist position did not contribute much to the force, because if the wrist is moving, then all the 4 fingers will move, or if the wrist is producing a force, then all of them will produce. So, it will complicate matters further. So, the wrist contribution was minimized or absolutely arrested using this kind of a setup, and the participants arm, forearm was also tied to this wooden block using velcro strips. Okay. So, people could not produce force either with the forearm or wrist. So, this was essentially a distal upper limb task, that is the finger task, to make sure. One more thing is that I can place the loop, let us say this is the loop, my left hand fingers is the loop. I can place the finger, index finger for example, either with the distal phalanx touching the loop, or with the middle phalanx touching the loop, or with the proximal phalanx touching the loop. Okay. So, there was instruction depending on which phalanx is producing the force or which interphalangeal joint is producing the force. I can also keep it at the joint, the distal interphalangeal joint or the proximal interphalangeal joint or the distal phalanx. So, I can place this loop, or I can place my finger in this loop such that either the distal phalanx or the interphalangeal joints, one of the 2 interphalangeal joints is supported by the loop. Okay. So, that is a crucial aspect of this experimental design. So, I can place it such that either only the distal phalanx or the dip joint or the pip joint is involved. The question is, for differential activation of FDP, FDS and INT muscles. INT is muscles like thenar, hypothenar, lumbrical, interossei, those. Remember long time ago we discussed what are the intrinsic muscles of the fingers. We discussed this. These are the thenar, hypothenar, lumbricals and the interossei, right. Depending on that where you place the loop, different muscles will be activated. I can place the finger such that the middle of the distal phalanx of each finger is going to contribute to force, or at the dip joint, or at the distal interphalangeal joint, or at the pip joint, the proximal interphalangeal joint. Depending on that, different muscles will contribute, and I can study differential muscle contributions to enslavement. This is the idea, or how the muscles differently contribute to this process. This is the idea. They had 10 right-handed university participants in this study. The task is press as hard as possible on these loops with the given combination, because if it is as hard as possible task, you have to leave break between trials. Okay. Perhaps they did that. Use one of these combinations. There are many different combinations that are possible. Let us just discuss this. I can use either just the individual fingers, index, middle, ring and little, index, middle, ring and little individually. So, that is 4 choose 1, 4 different combinations. Then I can use 2 finger combinations. How many different 2 finger combinations are possible in a 4 finger task? If there are 4 fingers available, how many different 2 fingers combinations are possible, that is 4 choose 2 is 6. For clarity, that is index middle, index ring, index little, middle ring, middle little, and ring little, is it not? These are the 6 possibilities. These are the 6 possibilities. Okay. Then I can have 3 finger tasks, that is actually 4 choose 3, but that is 4 choose 1, is it not? 4 choose 3 is 4 choose 1, which is 4. What are the 4 possibilities of 3 finger tasks? Index middle ring, index middle little, index ring little, and middle ring little. These are the 4 possibilities of 3 finger tasks when we choose among the 4 that are available. Then if I use all the 4 fingers of the 4 that are available, I have 4 choose 4, which is exactly 1. So how many different experiments will I have to do? How many different conditions do I have? That is 4 plus 6 plus 4 plus 1 is equal to 15 different conditions. There are 15 different conditions that are there, and in each of these combinations, 15 different conditions are combinations, and in each of this combination I have to produce the force either with just the distal phalanx or the distal interphalangeal joint or the proximal interphalangeal joint. So there are 3 different locations. So they are calling this as combinations, this as conditions. So I will also follow the same. This is 15 combinations. Okay, these conditions are, what are the conditions? These are, what are the conditions? These are DP, DIP, and PIP and PIP. 3 conditions, 15 different combinations. So there are essentially 45 different experimental possibilities that are there. Okay. We will have to continue discussing this, but I just thought that I will set up the experiment for you. So what we discussed in this video was the experimental setup, whereby they use a loop to measure the tension on the tension produced by the fingers, right, or the force produced by the fingers, and they used 3 different conditions whereby the middle of the distal phalanx or the center of the distal phalanx or the pip joint or the dip joint are used to produce force, and they used 15 different combinations of fingers, as I just now discussed, to measure in these cases. So these are the combinations for which the instruction is given. Forces are measured in all the fingers in all cases. Okay, forces are always measured in all the fingers in all the conditions, but these are the instructed or the master fingers. Okay, these are the various possibilities. So we will continue this discussion of how they analyze this data and maybe even some of the results in the next video. With this, we come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for your attention.